Hi, my name is James White. I'm Program Associate for Leadership and Communications with Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and I'm joined today by Ascend Fellow and Director of the Center for Community Resilience at George Washington University's Milken School of Public Health, Dr. Wendy Ellis. Wendy, can you tell us a bit about the center and the work that you all do to strengthen families and communities?
Yes, so at the Center for Community Resilience, we are implementing the Building Community Resilience process where we bring together multiple sectors, multiracial networks, including parents, including community voices, to really begin to understand what are the adversities that are driving negative outcomes for our children and families, whether that is adverse childhood experiences, whether that's limited economic mobility, homelessness, food insecurity, and really begin to think about those root causes and build these multi-sector coalitions that begin to address that, not only to bounce back from adversity, but to really put the supports and buffers in place so that our families can move forward and our children can thrive.
And Wendy, what does race have to do with that? What does race have to do with the work that you all do at the center?
You know, equity is at the center of everything that we do. When we look at, from a public health approach, understanding that our racial hierarchy of outcomes is pretty consistent across the board. So when you think about looking at parental incarceration rates, children of color disproportionately are suffering from that. When we think about educational attainment or lack of educational attainment, again, children of color are at the bottom of the rung. When we look at homelessness and who's affected by homelessness or housing instability in our urban centers, again, children and families of color are always at the bottom of the rung. And so that really does call out that systematically, not just about the behaviors and choices of individuals, but systematically our systems are driving these types of outcomes. So absolutely, race has everything to do with it.
And so much of that we know goes back to our country's history of slavery. And as we come up on Juneteenth, why is that such an important moment in history for the U.S.? Why is Juneteenth such a significant part of U.S. history?
Yes, well, the history of Juneteenth is largely scrubbed from textbooks, let alone recognized in the public consciousness. But it is a classic example of the unwillingness to confront our brutal history of racial subjugation, domination, and even extermination when one considers the treatment of indigenous peoples before the first slaves arrived in 1619. So June 19th, 1865, the day that nearly 250,000 men, women, and children were finally freed after more than 2 years that the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. And why was this? It's because they were held under the Confederate flag in Galveston Bay, Texas. It literally took an army of Union soldiers to free them. An army. Now think about that. Men died for the right to continue to uphold a system that deemed my ancestors less than human. They broke this union in two and fought under the bars and stars, creating a nation separate and apart from our own for the right to hold other humans as property. It is this tortured history of our treatment of people of color as less than human, even in this present day, that we must confront. It's a complex truth, but one that influences all of the institutions in our society.
Now, Wendy, that Juneteenth date was in 1865, right? More than 150 years ago. What's the relevance of that today? Why is it important now?
Yes, because there's an enduring legacy from that type of subjugation that has been quite deliberate in all of our systems. You know, certain recent events such as COVID-19 pandemic, the Amy Cooper incident in New York Central Park, and the public lynching of George Floyd in Minneapolis have laid bare systemic inequities that are integral parts of our nation's fabric. So with COVID-19, we see disproportionate deaths in communities of color. With Amy Cooper, we see this idea borne out that the police are here as a protection force for white people. That with the George Floyd incident, we see that police brutality is disproportionately impacted and a lethality of that brutality on men and women of color. So these inequities are certainly the legacies of our racial apartness the otherness that we've done in this community or in this country, and they're in plain sight. And what I just listed up until a few weeks ago were socially acceptable until they're not. So are we finally at a breaking point, or are we ready as a nation to create a new social norm, a new social contract? That is the question that is actually playing out in our streets today.
So Wendy, if we are at that point, we're at the point where we can no longer deny these inequities, no longer deny that legacy. What opportunities does that recognition and does that kind of reckoning present to us moving forward?
Yes, Juneteenth provides this opportunity for all Americans, regardless of race, color, or country of origin, to explore their humanity and challenge our own notion of what is right and just, and who has access to what is right and just. That is the beginning of a process of truth and reconciliation. So recognizing Emancipation Day or Juneteenth isn't about a celebration, isn't about a parade. It provides a national day of reflection, discussion, and reconciliation with our nation's complex truths that are rooted in the belief of white supremacy.
So if we start at that recognition, we still seem so far away from where we need to be to ultimately, realize where we need to be in this country. So I'll ask you, just where do we start? How do we know if we're succeeding? And then where do we look for leadership in this work?
Yeah, so let me start with the first part. How do we begin? I think, this truth part is essential to this. We have to start by confronting our truths. This Juneteenth, I'm calling upon Americans to explore our history, not just Black history, but America's history as it pertains to the treatment of African Americans and other people of color. I can give you a short list. Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. The Trail of Tears, 1831. The Black Codes, post-Reconstruction. The history of the Angola plantation and prison in Louisiana. Japanese internment during World War II. Voter suppression and disenfranchisement of returning citizens, gerrymandering and poll taxes. Muslim bans. Could go on and on and on. But there's this consistent otherness and the treatment, different and separate of individuals of color in communities of color in this country. That's a starting point. And I believe that if we encourage Americans to learn our history, discuss our racial traumas, to acknowledge the pain, we can then begin to commit to righting the wrongs. Only individuals committed to this oppression benefit from keeping history in the dark. So, as Maya Angelou wrote, once we know better, we can do better. So I believe that through the knowledge of our country's painful truth, we can begin to reconcile to build an equitable and just nation. And so who takes on that mantle? We all have to take on that mantle. This is not a movement that is going to be built once again and led once again solely by people of color. It is white people coming from the margins and joining in this, the recognition of what is right and what is just, dismantling, intentionally dismantling those levers that continue that cycle of white supremacy, so that we can create equity, so that we can create a just community. And more importantly, we can build a society that no longer traumatizes our children. Ultimately, that should be our hope. That is our future, a future of which our children, regardless of race, regardless of country of origin, have the ability to live to their highest levels of attainment, that of which they aspire. That's the dream, and I believe it can become reality once we confront the truth.
Thank you, Wendy.